Awesome job. We can clear our cart, whether by removing single item or removing all the items altogether. So now, of course, let's add the functionality where we can toggle the amount of items we have in the cart from that one product. And I'm going to start by adding some items because, of course, there's going to be some console logging along the way as well. So let's fill our cart. Again, I'm just going to add some random items. Don't freak out. Don't think that there's some purpose to what I'm doing right now. There's just some random items. If you want to add one, you can add one. If you add, I don't know, 15, you can add 15. That's really up to you. What I'm interested is these two buttons. Because remember, we used them in the add to cart. So that was one setup. And now, of course, I'm reusing the same component. However, the functionality is going to be different, where we'll control the values that we have in the cart. So let's navigate first to the cart context. And then where we have toggle amount, notice how I'm taking two things. I'm taking in the ID and I'm also taking in the value. Now, what is the value? Well, since I would want to add the same function to both buttons, that's why I'll pass in whether I'm increasing or decreasing. And if you remember our first, I believe, reducer project, or maybe it wasn't the first one was technically in tutorial, but remember when we were setting up that cart? And let me see. Sorry, there's going to be a small detour. Let me keep on scrolling. Remember this project? So we did something similar where essentially we first set up the function just for increase and decrease, and then I combined it. So if you remember the project, it's going to be very easy what we're about to do. I have ID and value. So this one will be either increase or decrease. And then, of course, I would want to dispatch my action. So say dispatch the name of the function, or I'm sorry, I guess the name of the action will be toggle cart item or cart item amount, more precisely. And then for the payload, I'll pass in two things. So now my payload will be an object, and I'm going to be looking for the item, so the ID. And then the second thing, of course, is going to be my value. So set this up as an object. I'm missing one set of curly braces over here. And no, apologies, like so. So this should be our setup type will be toggle cart item amount. And then when it comes to payload ID plus the value. So now in this case, my payload is an object. And before we do anything in the reducer, I would want to navigate to my cart item, since that is where we are setting this up. And then check it out. I have my toggle amount, and in the increase in my placeholder, I would just want to invoke the function. Again, the difference here is that I'm not passing in the toggle amount to the amount buttons. I'm just passing in the increase and decrease that are coming from my cart item. And then in that cart item, I invoke this toggle amount. So I just say here, toggle amount. And for the increase, of course, I would want to pass in first ID. But then as far as the string, I'm just going to go with inc. So increase. And then for decrease, pretty much the same, just the value will change. So now, of course, I'm still passing in the same ID. I'm getting the cart item ID. But of course, the string is decrease. And since I would want us to see what's happening, I'll go to inspect. And where we have the cart context, I just want to toggle both of these values. So log and then value over here. And you'll notice in the console that once we click, check it out. Now, of course, we have no matching toggle cart item amount. Don't worry about it. You know what? For the time being, since I just want to console log the values, I'm just going to remove that action, that dispatch. I'll set it up in a second and then see. I have my cart item ID. And by the way, this is very, very important. Please understand that in this case, I'm already iterating over the cart. So I'm getting that cart ID, which is just a combination of product ID plus the color. It's not like initially when we were adding it to the cart, then we were constructing an ID. In this case, I already have the ID since I'm iterating over the array. And there it is. Now I have the ink. So if I'll click on decrease, now the ID is going to be exactly the same, but the string is decreased. So let's go to a toggle amount. We'll uncomment our dispatch, and in the cart reducer, right after clearing the cart, now we could set up our toggle functionality. So let's say here if, and then action dot type is equal to toggle cart item amount. Then first I would want to get both of those values. So const ID comma value coming from action and payload. So let's grab those ones first. And similarly to how we were increasing the amount when we added item to the cart, we will iterate over the cart, and then we'll check first what is the value. So if we want to increase, then of course we'll add 1 to the amount. If not, then we'll decrease. So first we'll check whether the item matches. So if the ID is equal to ID, and then there's going to be 2 more if statements where we will either increase or decrease. So now let's start by setting up our temp cart. And of course, this is going to be state and then cart and then map. And before we set up rest of the functionality, I simply want to go with my return, where I'm going to go with dot 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 state. And now, of course, my cart will be that new temp cart array where I'm iterating over my cart. And then, like I said, the steps are following. Where first I want to check if the item ID matches ID. And again, I already mentioned this, but please keep in mind that in this case, ID is already that value. ID is already this ID plus color. So it's not like previously where I was getting ID and color separately. And that's why I was checking, hey, ID plus color. In this case, I don't have to do that. This ID is already that long value. So I just say if the ID is equal to ID, then of course I'll toggle those values. If not, then I just simply want to return the item. That's why we set up else, and we say return the item as it is, my item, as I'm iterating over. However, if this matches, then of course there's 2 options. I either have value increase or decrease, correct? So we simply go here with if value is equal to increase, then there's going to be 1 piece of functionality. And then if there's going to be a value of decrease, well, then we'll have something else. Now, as far as returning, both of them will return this item is just the amount that is going to change. And we'll set up our new amount. So new amount is equal to item amount plus 1. Why? Well, because we're increasing. Kind of makes sense, right? And then I need to check that amount so it is not bigger than the max. Remember, highly, highly important. I have some stock values. In this case, I cannot just say, yeah, add 99 items. No, because I always need to check for my stock. That's why we're setting up this max one. So I'll say if the new amount is bigger than the item dot max, well, then I just need to set it back to that max, whatever it is. Some cases it's 2, some cases it's 11. I just randomly added those values. So item will be to that item max. And then over here, of course, I would want to return it. I'm just going to say dot 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 item. So I'll spread out the rest of the properties and I'll say amount is equal to my new amount. We save it, and now we just need to set up the decrease. And in order to speed this up, I'll just grab these lines of code, since there's going to be quite a few similar things there. And we'll start by -1 because we are decreasing. And in this case, we're just checking if the new amount is less than 1. So if that is the case, I'm just going to set it equal to 1. That's all I want to do. Previously, in some other projects, we removed the item from the cart. In this case, I'm not going to add that functionality. We already have the button to do that. So that's it. Notice how I'm clicking and nothing is happening by design because, of course, we are at the 1. But if we want, we can increase. This is going to be the max. So we kind of have more items. And of course, in this case, for example, the max is 7. And if you can do the same, if you can increase and decrease the amount, now, of course, we can set up our totals.